Many businesses are concerned about the financial implications, as we just discussed.
That's right.
Can you shed some light on some general costs that people can expect?
Yeah, I think it's good to start with kind of the general buckets of where expenses might come into play here. The first is, and maybe most obvious, is assessment costs. And I guess we're beginning with the end in mind here, that there will be an assessment by a C3PAO, the Certified Third Party Assessment Organization. I think I got that right. There will be costs associated with it. We don't know precisely how many days it's going to take to conduct an assessment, how many assessors might be involved. It's really going to be situational to how complex a company is and their network, really the scope and size of the network, things like that. But everything we're hearing is that these assessors are going to charge rates that professional assessors charge. They're specialists. I'm hinting at the fact that they're going to be expensive, and I think that's to be expected. If I were to ballpark it, I would say if you're ISO 9001 certified and you pay for that initial assessment, those who are certified have done that, you might triple that number, and you might be in the ballpark of what the CMMC assessment is going to cost. We don't know precisely. It's just what we're hearing and the observations we're making. But it's certainly more expensive than an ISO assessment audit would be, significantly. So that's something to plan for. Now, there are ways that we'll talk about today of narrowing down what they need to see, and therefore perhaps narrowing down how much time they're going to spend, and then that leads to maybe less cost in the assessment. So there are some things that can be done in the planning phase that ultimately would affect that assessment cost. But it is something to plan for, and it is recurring, I believe, Rick, does it sound right, every 3 years?
Correct.
Every 3 years, there would be a follow-up assessment. So anyway, this is part of the cost. Secondly would be getting your staff and your employees up to speed. So you definitely need to plan on a learning curve. These are technical requirements. They require a clear understanding of 110 different controls, different practices that are in the NIST and CMMC requirements. And so your technical staff is going to have to learn the details at the technical level. So you got to plan on some training. This is where I'm kind of going with that. But also your managers, your senior management need to be involved and helping to create the culture and the priority of cybersecurity within the business. So management need to put some time and perhaps expense around getting management up to speed, and then all employees who are involved in protecting the CUI, the Controlled Unclassified Information that we've talked about in previous months, they would need some training, in particular on the company's policies that they need to follow. And it certainly helps them to get some general awareness about the assessment and what to say to an assessor, what not to say, things like that. But in more specifically, the internal policies and practices and technologies of the company, employees need to know and be able to articulate how things are used. So there's training, workforce development costs. Third would be documentation and policy development. This part is not for the faint of heart. Again, I'm going to compare this to ISO. We're kind of used to ISO being pretty streamlined when it comes to documentation. In fact, many companies found in previous revisions of ISO that you could narrow down your documentation, you could scale back. There wasn't quite as much emphasis. That is not true of NIST and CMMC. There's a heavy emphasis in documentation. Every one of the 14 families and all 110 practices, controls, need to be documented in policy form. And then there is additional documentation that generates records, evidence artifacts is what they're called in this language, but generate the information, the files that are needed, whether they're paper documents or electronic documents. There's work to be done there. And then in some cases, having written procedures or instructions for employees to do certain things is going to be needed. So there's a heavy amount of documentation. I guess I shouldn't have skipped over the biggest document, which is the system security plan. Mm-hmm. We dedicated earlier this year a whole session on the SSP and the POAM and things like that. So documentation and the time to develop it and the expertise to develop it, whether you get a consultant to help with that, all of those need to be factored into your budget. And then finally, again, these are sort of obvious things, but there is almost without a doubt technology upgrades going to be needed. Mm. There are infrastructure upgrades. We'll put them under that heading. So whether you are going to keep using your current equipment, your current network, your current infrastructure to maintain the CUI, to protect the CUI, mm. If that's the path you go down, there will almost certainly be upgrades and enhancements and perhaps even new equipment needed to meet these stringent requirements. Or if you're going to move into the cloud, mm-hmm. Not use your existing network, but move into the cloud, into what's called an enclave, there's going to be a cost to use the enclave, usually a subscription cost of some sort. And there are different, those are two options. There are others, kind of a hybrid mix of things. But the technology piece of this and getting the technology set up properly and your staff available to are able to maintain it is all going to head to cost. So I guess I'd put, if I were putting a budget together, I'd probably put assessment, people in the training, documentation, and then infrastructure as kind of the big buckets to plan for. Yeah. How much each of those costs, you're not going to want to hear us say this, but it depends. Yeah. And it's going to depend on your current environment, your current level of preparedness, where you're starting from. Mm-hmm. If you're have older equipment and haven't really kept up with security practices and technologies, you're going to probably have to go farther with upgrades than if someone has a real modern approach to their technology and their infrastructure. They may have some things already in place they wouldn't have to spend more money on. Mm-hmm. So it will depend. And this is where getting some help to make a good plan, a roadmap, is really important, because you don't want to spend money on things that you didn't have to, mm-hmm. but because you didn't quite understand and you wanted to be safe, you spent the money anyway. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have spare money like that to throw around. But you can talk yourself into spending a lot of money if you aren't really thoughtful and, mm-hmm. and educated mm-hmm. in planning out your approach. Yeah. So, we're trying to be square with people, trying to be straight. This is what to expect. Mm-hmm. There are ways to keep the costs under control, which is, of course, the point today, is to keep it affordable. But there are costs. And yeah. Cost is not avoidable. Mm-hmm. It's something we have to plan on.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. This is part of a longer series on DFARS, NIST, and CMMC compliance produced by Core Business Solutions. Please subscribe to this channel, like this video with a thumbs up, and click the bell to get notified when we drop a new video. Also, we'd appreciate it if you would share this video with your colleagues who need to stay up to speed on DFARS, NIST, and CMMC. Thank you, and we'll see you again in the next video.